In 2024, I moved to a small coastal town in Cornwall called Dunmere. It wasn't much, just cliffs, seagulls, and a high street that closed by 7. I'd left Manchester to start over. New job, new town, new peace of mind. At least, that's what I thought I was getting. The place I rented was an old stone cottage at the very end of Dunmere Road. It faced the sea directly. You could hear the waves from the bedroom window. It was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. The first few nights were calm. I'd sit by the window, watching the lighthouse beam sweep over the cliffs. There was another house just down the hill, boarded up windows, overgrown garden, broken roof tiles. The locals called it the Silent House. When I asked the shopkeeper about it, she said, "Best to leave that place alone, love. It's been empty since the winter of 2019. She wouldn't say why. I should have listened. It started small. Every night around midnight, I'd hear what sounded like a door creaking open down the hill. Then faint footsteps, crunching gravel moving slowly up the road. But whenever I looked out, no one was there. On the third night, the noise stopped right outside my gate. Just breathing, slow, shaky. Then it faded away. I tried convincing myself it was an animal, a fox maybe, but the breathing sounded human, tired, cold. A few nights later, I came home, then to here late after a night shift. It was past 1 in the morning. The fog was thick, and the air smelled of salt and iron. As I walked past the silent house, I noticed something. The front door, the one that had been sealed shut with this, was slightly open, just a crack. A faint light flickered inside. I froze. It looked like candlelight moving gently. And then I heard a woman's voice, soft, broken. She said, "Please, come in." I ran. Back in my cottage, I locked every door, every window, and turned on all the lights. But when I looked outside, I saw something that turned my stomach cold. That same faint, flickering candlelight, now glowing from my living room window. I walked in slowly, heart pounding. The light was gone. Everything was exactly how I'd left it, except for one thing. Someone had drawn a small symbol in the middle of my wooden floor, a perfect circle with 3 lines crossing through it. It was carved into the wood. The next morning, I went down to the silent house in daylight. The door was closed again. The boards were still nailed in place. But on the front step, there was something new, a candle. Melted halfway, still warm. That evening, I decided to call the local police. They came, had a look, and told me the same story the shopkeeper refused to explain. Apparently, back in 2019, a woman named Claire went and lived in that silent house. She moved there with her husband to escape city life. But when winter came, she started complaining about voices in the sea, whispering her name every night through the wind. Her husband thought she was losing her mind. Then one night she disappeared. All they found was a single candle burning by the door and that same carved symbol on the floor. The officer told me, "They say she still walks this road, looking for anyone who'll listen." I laughed it off at the time, but later that night I woke to the sound of knocking, slow and rhythmic, on my front door. 3 knocks, then silence. When I finally got up the nerve to check, there was no one there, but someone had left another candle on my doorstep. Still burning, wax dripping down the stone. I moved out 2 days later. The estate agent didn't argue, didn't even ask why. She just said quietly, "You lasted longer than most. Now I live back in Manchester. No cliffs, no fog, no sea, but every Halloween, right at midnight, I still hear it. 3 slow knocks on my door. And when I check the window, I swear I can see her, a woman standing in the mist, holding a candle, smiling through the glass." When I was 16, my family moved into a quiet little house at the end of a cul-de-sac in North Yorkshire. It wasn't much, just a small semi with flaking paint and a long back garden, but it was peaceful, the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. At least, that's what I thought. We moved in during October, right before Halloween. The neighbors were friendly enough, though most of them warned us about strange kids pulling pranks around that time of year. My parents laughed it off, but from the moment we settled in, something about that house felt off. My bedroom was upstairs at the front, and through my window, I could see directly into the house next door. It looked abandoned, curtains drawn, paint peeling, windows thick with dust. The estate agent told us the family who lived there moved away after a tragedy, but didn't go into detail. I didn't think much of it until Halloween night. That evening, my parents went to a neighbor's costume party, leaving me home alone to hand out sweets. It was quiet. Hardly any kids came by. By 10 o'clock, I'd switched off the porch light and gone upstairs to watch something. That's when I saw it. The upstairs window of the empty house next door was glowing with light, a pale, flickering yellow like candlelight. And in the center of the window stood a girl. She looked about my age, maybe younger. with long black hair and a faded blue dress that shimmered faintly in the light. She wasn't moving, just staring straight at me through the glass. At first I thought it was a reflection, then she blinked. I froze. My phone was in my hand, but I couldn't move. She slowly raised her arm and waved. The light went out. I sat there for what felt like hours, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing. The window stayed dark. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just a trick, maybe some local kid pulling a Halloween prank. But when my parents got home later, I asked them about the house. They exchanged a look. My mom said quietly, "That house has been empty for years, love." Since the accident, I asked what accident, but she just said, "It's not something to talk about on Halloween." I barely slept that night. The next morning, I checked the house again. The window was still dusty, cobwebs hanging from the frame. When the sun hit it just right, I saw something that made my stomach twist. There was a handprint, small, faint, and on the inside of the glass. That evening, I told myself I'd imagined it. Until 10:30, the same time as before. The light flickered on again, the same window, the same girl, only this time she was closer to the glass, her face pale and expressionless. Eyes wide, lips parted slightly. I stared back, terrified, unable to move, and then I noticed something behind her. Movement. Faint, but visible. A shadow. Someone standing behind her. The light snapped off. I didn't sleep that night either. The next day, I mentioned it to one of the neighbors, an older woman who lived 2 doors down. When I described the girl in the blue dress, she went completely still. Then she said, "You shouldn't be seeing her. Not on Halloween." She told me that years ago, a family lived in that house. A mother, father, and their daughter. The same age as me. On Halloween night, the father went out to check the garden decorations. When he came back, his daughter was gone. The window was still locked from the inside. They never found her. After that, the family moved away. And every Halloween since, people claimed to see a girl in blue at the window. Always the same time, 10:30, always silent. That night, I swore I wouldn't look again. But fear has a strange way of turning into curiosity. At 10:29, I stood at my window, and right on cue, the light in her window flickered on. She was there, but this time she wasn't looking at me. Her head turned slightly toward her door. And then the light in my room flickered just once, and I heard it. It's 3 slow taps on my window. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the curtain swayed, even though the window was closed. And behind it, a pale face, the same girl, on my side of the glass. I screamed and stumbled back. But she was gone. The window was shut tight. No footprints. No marks. Only one thing remained. A small smudge where her hand had been. The next morning, my dad said it was just the storm. Maybe branches hitting the glass. But I know what I saw. Every Halloween since, I leave the curtains closed. Because every year at 10:30 sharp, I still see that faint yellow light flicker on next door. And if you ever happen to be in North Yorkshire and you see a house with one upstairs light burning on Halloween night, don't look up because she's still there. Watching, waiting for someone to wave back. When I was 11 years old, I lived in a small village just outside of York. Nothing special. A few rows of council houses, one corner shop, and endless green fields that seemed to stretch on forever. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and where nothing bad ever really happened. At least that's what we all thought. My best friend at the time was a lad named Jamie. We were inseparable. Bikes, football, all of that. But what we loved most was exploring. There was an old, overgrown field about a mile from the estate. Nobody went there anymore, not since the farmer who owned it passed away. His house still stood on the hill, boarded up and rotting. The locals called it Henson's Field. The grown-ups said it was off limits, which of course meant we went there every weekend. One summer evening, the sun was setting and the air smelled like cut grass. Me and Jamie were skimming stones by the stream that ran through the field when we heard it. Laughter. Not the laughter of kids like us. It was higher pitched, distant, and echoing like it was carried by the wind. We stopped. Jamie said it sounded like someone playing. I told him no one else ever came here. Then, across the tall grass, maybe 100 feet away, we saw him. A boy, about our age, standing perfectly still in the middle of the field. He wore an old-fashioned school uniform, gray shorts, a white shirt, suspenders. Even from that distance, something felt off. The air was still, the grass unmoving, but his shirt fluttered slightly, like a breeze was hitting only him. We shouted, waved, but he didn't respond. He just stood there staring straight ahead, facing the woods. Then, without warning, he began to walk into the trees. Jamie, being braver than me, grabbed his bike and said, "Come on, let's see who he is." I hesitated but followed. We rode through the uneven ground until the field gave way to the tree line. We left our bikes and stepped in. It was colder there, quiet except for the crunch of leaves beneath our trainers. We looked for the boy for about 10 minutes before we found something strange. Footprints, small, barefoot, pressed deep into the mud. They led deeper in and then just stopped. No sign of anyone. Jamie said maybe the boy ran home. I wanted to believe that, but I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't alone. Just as we were turning to leave, we heard the laughter again, this time behind us. We spun around. No one there. The sound seemed to drift between the trees, circling us. We bolted. We sprinted back to our bikes. Jamie was faster. He always was. And by the time I got to the field, he was already pedaling hard toward the road. I followed, heart hammering, not daring to look back. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that boy in my mind. The way he didn't move, the way he vanished into the woods. The next day I told my mom about it. She went pale. She asked me to describe what he looked like. And when I mentioned the uniform and suspenders, she went quiet. Then she said, almost whispering, "You're not to go near that field again." Do you understand me? She wouldn't say why. Neither would my dad. For weeks, me and Jamie stayed away. But one day, curiosity got the better of him. He said we should go back, just to prove it was nothing. I told him no, I didn't want to. He went alone. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. They found his bike near the edge of the field the next morning. His footprints went into the woods and then stopped, just like the boys. Search teams combed the area for days, but there was nothing. No body, no sign of struggle, just his bike, the grass, and silence. The police called it a missing person case. My parents forbade me from ever talking about it again, but I never stopped wondering. Years went by. I moved away, tried to forget. Then, a few months ago, I went back to York to visit my parents. I hadn't thought about Henson's Field in years, not until I saw it again through the car window. It looked smaller, emptier, like time had drained it of life. And then I noticed something, a line of children's shoes hanging by their laces on the wire fence, dozens of them. When I asked my mom about it later, she went pale again and said, "They've been finding things in that field lately." I asked, "What kind of things?" She hesitated. Then she said, "Small things. Shoes, toys, sometimes bones." She told me they'd started digging there years ago after another boy disappeared. The police thought it was just coincidence, maybe kids leaving things behind, but the villagers, they whispered that the field kept them, that the boy who first vanished there wasn't human anymore, that he lures others in. That night, I couldn't resist. I parked near the old lane and walked toward the field. The air was colder than I remembered, the grass still high. I stood there looking out at the tree line, the same spot where I saw him all those years ago. And then I heard laughter, high-pitched, faint. I turned on my phone's flashlight. Through the light fog, I saw movement at small shifting shadows between the trees. Then one of them stepped forward, a boy in a gray school uniform, barefoot, and standing right beside him was another figure, taller. My heart stopped, because even though it had been nearly 20 years, I recognized that face instantly. Jamie. He looked exactly the same age as the day he vanished. He smiled and waved. That was the last night I ever went back to York. But sometimes, when the wind's right and the air smells like cut grass, I still hear them laughing.